reading inside of the Perennial Philosophy of Aldous Huxley to see what's in it. Whatever's in it is in it. It's age 76. Therefore, this is a quote from Eckhart. Start with that. Therefore, I give you still another thought, which is yet purer and more spiritual. The kingdom of heaven, all is in all is one, and all is ours. And these are like quotable quotes of Huxley. The doctrine that God is in the world has an important practical corollary, the sacredness of nature. This is about the sacredness of nature and the sinfulness and folly of man's overweening efforts to be her master rather than her intelligently docile collaborator. This is where we get into the question of why did they legalize plastics? Subhuman lives and even things are to be treated with respect and understanding, not brutally oppressed to serve our human ends. This is an interesting quote from Chuang Tzu. I don't know how you interpret it. The ruler of the Southern Ocean was Shu. The ruler of the Northern Ocean was Hu. And the ruler of the center was Chaos. Okay, so you have Shu and Hu. We're continually meeting in the land of chaos, who treated them very well. They consulted together how they might repay his kindness and said, quote, "Man, all have 7 orifices for purposes of seeing, hearing, eating, and breathing, while this ruler alone has not a single one. Let us try to make them for him." Accordingly, they dug 1 orifice in him every day. At the end of 7 days, Chaos died. Chuang Tzu. This is delicately comic parable, Chaos's nature. In the state of wu-wei, non-assertion or equilibrium, Chaos's nature. Shu and Hu are the living images of those busy persons who thought they would improve on nature by turning dry prairies into wheat fields and produce deserts, who proudly proclaim the conquest of the air and then discover that they had defeated civilization, who chopped down vast forests to provide the newsprint demanded by that universal literacy which was to have made the world safe for intelligence and democracy, and got wholesale erosion, pulp magazines, and the organs of fascism, communist, capitalist, nationalist propaganda. In brief, she and Hu are devotees of the apocalyptic religion of inevitable progress. The creed is that the kingdom of heaven is outside you. The creed is that the kingdom of heaven is outside you and in the future. So it must be on the outside and it's in the future. Chuang Tzu, on the other hand, like all good Taoist, has no desire to bully nature into subserving ill-considered temporal ends at variance with the final end of man as formulated in the Perennial Philosophy. His wish is to work with nature so as to produce material and social conditions in which individuals may realize the Tao. That's good. His wish is to work with nature so as to produce material and social conditions in which individuals may realize the Tao. On every level, from the physiological up to the spiritual. Compared with that of Taoist and Far Eastern Buddhists, the Christian attitude towards nature has been curiously insensitive and often downright domineering and violent. Take their clue from the unfortunate remark in Genesis: Catholic moralists have regarded animals as mere things, which men do right to exploit for their own ends. Like landscape painting, the humanistic movement in Europe was an almost completely secular affair. In the Far East, both were essentially religious. The Greeks believed that hubris was always followed by nemesis, that if you went too far, you would get a knock on the head, to remind you that the gods will not tolerate insolence on the part of mortal men. In the sphere of human relations, the modern mind understands the doctrine of hubris and regards it as mainly true. We wish pride to have a fall, and we see that very often it does fall. To have too much power over one's fellows, to be too rich, too violent, too ambitious, all this invites punishment. And in the long run, we notice punishment of one sort or another duly comes. But the Greeks did not stop there, because they regarded nature as, in some ways, divine. They felt that it had to be respected, and they were convinced that a hubristic lack of respect for nature would be punished by avenging nemesis. In the Persians, Aeschylus gives the reasons, the ultimate metaphysical reasons for the barbarians' defeat. Xerxes was punished for two offenses: overweening imperialism directed against the Athenians, and overweening imperialism directed against nature. He tried to enslave his fellow man, and he tried to enslave the sea by building a bridge across the Hellespont. Atasha, from shore to shore, he bridged the Hellespont, ghost of Darius. What could he chain? The mighty Bosporus? Atasha, even so, some god assisting his design, ghost of Darius, some god of power to cloud his better sense. Today, we recognize and condemn the first kind of imperialism. But most of us ignore the existence or even the very possibility of the second, and yet the author of Erewhon was certainly not a fool, and now that we are paying the appalling price for our much-touted conquest of nature, his book seems more than ever topical, and Butler was not the only 19th century skeptic in regard to inevitable progress. A generation or more before him, Alfred de Vigny was writing about the new technological marvel of his days, the steam engine, writing in a tone very different from the enthusiastic roarings and trumpeting of his great contemporary, Victor Hugo. There's a French quote here. Maybe I shouldn't read it. French accent. Sur le terreau de feu, quoi, voix soufflée. Your French is terrible. Oh. You're supposed to read this. A little later in the poem, Toi de sois ballon talon. He adds, looking backwards across the carnage and the devastation, we could see that Vigny was perfectly right. None of those gay travelers of whom Victor Hugo was the most vulgar, vociferously eloquent, had the faintest notion where that first funny little puffing belly was taking them. Or rather, they had a very clear notion, but it happened to be entirely false. For they were convincing that puffing belly was hauling them at full speed towards universal peace and the brotherhood of man, while the newspapers, which they were so proud of being able to read as the train rumbled along towards its utopian destination, not more than 50 years or so away, were the guarantee that liberty and reason would soon be everywhere triumphant. Puffing Billy has now turned into a four-motored bomber, loaded with white phosphorus and high explosives, and the free press is everywhere the servant of its advertisers. The pressure of group or of the government, and yet for some inexplicable reason, travelers now far from gay still hold fast to the religion of inevitable progress, which is, in the last analysis, the hope and faith in the teeth of all human experience that one can get something from nothing. How much saner and more realistic in the Greek view that every victory has to be paid for, and that for some victories the price exalted is so high that it overweighs any advantage that may be obtained. Modern man no longer regards nature as being in any sense divine and feels pretty free to behave towards her as an overwhelming conqueror and tyrant. The spoils of recent technological imperialism have been enormous. But meanwhile, nemesis has seemed to be that we get our kicks as well as halfpence. For example, has the ability to travel in 12 hours from New York to LA given more pleasure? Has it given more pleasure to the human race than the dropping of bombs on fire has given pain? There is no known method of computing the amount of felicity or goodness in the world at large. What is obvious, however, is that the advantages accruing from recent technological advances, or in the Greek phraseology, for recent acts of hubris, directed against nature, and generally accompanied by corresponding disadvantages that gains in one direction entail losses in another direction, and we never get something except for something, whether the net result of these credit and debits to operation in the genuine progress and virtue, happiness, charity, or intelligence is something we can never definitely determine, is because the reality of progress can never be determined, that the 19th and 20th centuries have had to treat it as an article of religious faith.
What are you doing? Are you crazy or what?
I'm out of time. To the exponents of the perennial philosophy, the question of whether progress is inevitable or even real is not a matter of primary importance for them. The important thing as individual men and women should come to the unitive knowledge of the divine ground, and what interests them in regard to the social environment is not its progressiveness or non-progressiveness, but the degree to which it helps or hinders individuals in their advance towards man's final end. I'm practicing my speed reading. We had read from page 76 to 80 from the Perennial Philosophy.